Welcome to the Smart Connected podcast. I have a great guest for you tonight. It's Sandy Brown. Welcome, Sandy.
Hello. Yes. Hello, Jane.
So Sandy is a conflict resolution and negotiation specialist, and she's a lawyer. And I'd love you to just tell us about how your journey started, Sandy, and how you came to be an expert in this field.
Yes. Thank you for having me on here. I'm happy to share. So I think I've been mediating since I was a child, really, but I just didn't know it was called mediation. So I initially started off being a solicitor. So I've been a litigation solicitor for 14 years. And there's a place for litigation, but actually mediation is, for me, the way forward. And I think that's where the world is going now as well.
Yeah. So mediation and litigation, they're two opposite ends of the spectrum, aren't they? Because litigation is when people get really angry with each other and they all want their own way and they want to win, don't they? And mediation is when they come together and they find a win-win solution. So would you say that it is the goal of a lot of should we say litigation lawyers to actually bring opposing sides together and get them to agree a solution? Or would you say that really the juice is in actually keeping that conflict alive and actually, keeping a little bit of hostility in the picture?
That is such a great question because a lot of people think litigation and mediation are the opposites. And actually, if you take it in its rawest form, yes, you can either litigate or mediate. But nowadays, I think a combined approach people are finding is better. I mean, you're always going to get some solicitors who love a juicy conflict. And, let's be honest, it's good for fees. And I'm pleased to say that the firm I work for, they are taking a more holistic approach, and they're not so interested in polarization. It's more what's the right thing for the client. If it is to litigate, if it is to go through the courts, then of course we can advise about that. But if there is another way, if settlement is there, I mean, as litigators, you should always consider settlement and mediation as well. And mediation, I would say, is more of a win-win, whereas litigation, people think it's a myth of win-lose, But I have found, even in litigation cases, multi-million-pound cases that I used to deal with years ago, and even now, even when parties win, they don't feel like they have succeeded. That's because they've not been heard and understood. Whereas if they had mediated, they would have perhaps come up with a win-win situation where they would have felt heard and understood and still, had a win in their mind.
Yes, and I must say that I remember when I separated from my the father of my oldest two daughters, that we actually we engaged a mediation specialist, and the difference was enormous. Really, it was quite surprising that we could actually come together and agree some things. So it wasn't that easy, but it was so worth it in the end. So I've had a little bit of experience of that myself. And it's always better, isn't it? It just leaves you with a better feeling, doesn't it?
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because there's different types of mediation, because there's mediation in litigation, but there's also family mediation, and I do family mediation, and actually the common thing I hear is, I'm not sure this is right for mediation, or my partner will never agree to mediation, or it's going to be extremely hard work. But actually, or we don't communicate, so we can't mediate. So actually those situations which are perfect for mediation, and as you said, it really helps you, and actually you find people do work through it, in a mediation to get to the outcome. So And I mean, did it save you lots of time, money, and stress?
Well, it did actually, and I have to say that it's not the same as just having a mediator who's like a counsellor, because for me, when we had this mediation solicitor lawyer, then she was actually somebody that knew the law. So I think you have to know the law, because you have to know what you're giving away and what you're keeping and what all of those kind of minutiae. And if you aren't actually a lawyer, but you're trying to kind of mediate, then you can only really go so far. So for me, it was very important that she wasn't a counsellor, wasn't like a marriage
Yes.
guidance counsellor or something like that, which a lot of people think mediators are, because obviously there
Yeah.
are also mediators in counseling environments and marriage guidance
Yes.
and all of that kind of thing. But it is a very specific thing, isn't it, that you do?
It is, and there are non-legal mediators out there, and
Mm-hmm.
some people say they prefer them, but what I've found in the years I've been mediating is people like the fact that I am a solicitor. I'm a litigation solicitor. I also do family, so because I have that legal knowledge, they know that I'm bringing that to the table, and I can give parties more options.
Yes.
So I think it does give me the edge that I'm a solicitor mediator stroke negotiator. So
Yeah.
it does it's always going to be good to have lots of specialism, and more than that, I would say experience. If I've never dealt with conflict before in my life, how can I help others? And I know you may ask me about that, but I have dealt with conflict in lots of different situations, and I think I can add more value as a result.
Yeah, so it must be very rewarding, what you do, Sandy. I'm sure that when you see people that are, they have actually managed to come together and they have managed to resolve their issues, and both sides go away feeling, well, actually, that's pretty fair, and we found something that works for both of us. That must be amazing. I'm sure it is. But what happens when people just are being unreasonable and they just do not want to see the other person's side? Can it get a bit fraught at times?
Oh, definitely. Yes. I mean, so two things. Yes, it is rewarding when you get to the end. I mean, it just gives me such a boost. That's why I love what I do, bringing parties together, especially difficult conflicts where they are polarized. They're not seeing eye to eye for lots of reasons. I get my toolkit out and decide which skill, which tool am I going to use in that mediation. But actually, when things get fraught, I would say you mustn't shy away from that. In fact, it needs to get fraught to go out the other end, to come out the other end. It needs to get fraught so that parties can really resolve their issues. And, it's okay for it to get heated. Absolutely. And in fact, when it does get heated, you actually sometimes find the root cause of that conflict. Then you
Oh,
think, okay, this is what this is really about. So
So let's get down to it, because I love these nitty-gritty, meaty conversations. And root cause is like, it's just a magic. There's a magic couple of words to me. So what root causes have you found when you have started unpicking, should we say, these kind of high stakes situations? What's underneath it, typically?
brilliant question. I'm so pleased you asked me that. I'm so delighted. So it is all about human needs. Okay, when someone feels their needs are not being met,
Mm-hmm.
then it's going to lead to all kinds of conflict. Now it could be. So I use lots of techniques to establish what the needs are, but common issues that come up, which is the root cause. So I would say surface level, we're not getting on, we want a divorce if we're talking about divorce. But actually, if you drill down to it, they've been unhappy for a while, and maybe they've lost their job, and it's that lack of certainty, that
Uh-huh.
the lack of importance that is making them feel that they don't want to be in this marriage anymore, because they can see there is, they can't be the provider. And for a lot of men, not being able to provide for a family is the worstest thing. So they want to end
Yeah.
matters, you know,
I,
or
yeah.
it could be just the need to feel important, you know, to feel attractive again. A lot of women say they're in relationships and their husbands don't make them feel attractive, you know, and they think by having a, you know, going through a divorce and finding a new partner, maybe that will help. But also people just change as a result, you know. They've had life events, someone has died, and actually they've realized, you know, I'm not that happy in this relationship. So I want to, I mean, we're talking a lot about family mediation, but you know, even with litigation cases, you know, people say, oh, it's not the money, it's the principle. It's like, okay, principles cost money, but what principle is this? What's this really about? Is my favorite question. You
Yes.
know, but you can't ask that straight away. You have to, you know, drill. You have to talk for a while, drill down, and then okay, what's this really about? What's your overall outcome?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's when you really get to the reason behind the conflict.
Yes, yes. And so in business, when you say what's your ideal outcome, what do you think people usually want as a result of litigation? I mean, I'm sure that it's more money probably is the fundamental answer, but are there any other things that people fight over commonly?
Yes. So it's interesting how people always say it's just the money. You know, he owes me this much money, he must give it, you know, he's got to give it back to me. Or he didn't do the job properly, I want the money back. But actually, if you drill down, they'll all be based on emotional reasons. Someone feels someone's taken advantage of them. And that's what it's about. And then the money thing is that, you know, I'm not saying it's not about money, of course, but that's not the main reason. You know, if someone feels they've been taken advantage of, or, you know, they've had the wool pulled over their eyes, you know, all the same kind of thing, and then the money as well, it's gonna sting. And land, I've noticed land creates so much issues, so many disputes to do with land. We're talking about a couple of inches of land, but people get very het up about it because it's really important to them, or nothing else is in their life is going well, but they know that bit of land is theirs, and they know that for a fact and certainty, and they're willing to fight for it.
You know, I actually have a really good example of that. So when I lived in my old house, there was our garden backed onto this really big garden of this really big mansion, shall we say. And there was another house next to us, and they'd built a shed in their back garden. And when these people moved into their new mansion, then with this enormous garden, there was right at the bottom of their garden, they decided that they were going to look at the boundaries, and they wrote a letter to my next door neighbours saying that their shed encroached on the back of their garden by 2 inches and that they would have to move it. Which is just extraordinary. And so everybody, of course, the neighbours, they told everybody all around. And so everybody started hating these people that had just moved into this big house, this kind of enormous mansion that had just moved out from London. And they thought that they could just treat everybody. And it just went on and on and on. And it was just a ridiculous situation. So that's an example of that, isn't it?
It really is. And actually, what you've described is actually happening now. So, you know, so I'm partially employed and partially self-employed. And at work, I have cases with describing exactly what you've described. And actually, then the whole street hate these people who've asked for this, you know, and it's become ridiculous, you know, fences, garages, sheds. You know, we have brambles overgrowing, and it's often when I speak to them, I say, look, I can write a letter, and if the letter doesn't work, you know, we can issue proceedings, but you know, this is all going to cost, and where is this going to lead to? You know, there needs to be a degree of compromise, not always, but you see, that is another situation where I think mediation can help.
Yeah.
But or, if someone accidentally, I don't know, builds a fence 3 meters out, encroaches on their land, that needs to be rectified. But people say, how dare he do that? And that's it. It will spiral out of control. Whereas a conversation could have been had. But people are so busy, and if you're having a quick chat with a neighbour in the garden, you're not thinking clearly or necessarily. You just say, how dare they do that? And before you know it, the other person reacts, and then instead of responding, we're reacting. We become childlike.
Yeah.
In conflict. And we all do. I'm a mediator. Do I never experience conflict? Of course I do.
Yeah. None of us are perfect, are we?
No. It's a learning curve, for sure.
So did you study psychology? Because you talked about the human needs, and of course Tony Robbins, for example, he always talks about the 6 human needs, and so all of that, and what you were talking about going into a child state, there's a transactional analysis.
There is.
Isn't there, which is to do with the way that we relate to each other. It sounds like you've actually absorbed quite a lot of those lessons and you bring them into your work. Is that right, Sandy?
Wow. Did you look into my mind? Absolutely.
I'm quite good at that.
Yeah, you've picked up on all those things, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, you can do the traditional route, you could be in a solicitor and then do qualification to become a mediator. But actually, what makes a really good mediator is someone who has had those life experiences and is on a constant, as Tony Robbins says, constant and never-ending improvement journey. It's CANI. And that's what it stands for. And that I have a passion in the subject of conflict resolution and mediation. And I think there isn't just one way of mediating. And I think it's important to learn. So you said about TA, which is the transactional analysis, adult to adult conversation, whereas people often do the, critical parent, rebellious child, compliant child. So if anyone wants to know more about that, that's NLP, isn't it, really? Yeah. And then Tony Robbins, he talks about the 6 human needs, certainty, uncertainty, significance, growth and contribution, love and connection. And often when I'm in a mediation, I do look at what they need. Is it money? Is it importance? What have they lost? But I also think, what need are they trying to satisfy? And I do use Tony Robbins' human needs in that situation. Obviously, I don't tell them that. I think it through, and that helps me because it's just another tool to understand someone better. Yeah. And even with negotiation, I read a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and he talks about active listening. And empathy.
Yeah.
That those are the key skills for negotiation. It's not, having the stern voice and this is what I want and making demands. It's actually uncovering what the other person wants. So I think, open your mind and find out different ways of trying to understand the other person better.
Yes. I think that's just so important, isn't it? Just understanding and perhaps also reflecting back at them some things that they don't even see or understand themselves. Do you find you do that very much?
Yes, people have blind spots. I did psychology and philosophy at A level, and but there's so much more since what I studied at uni and college. People have blind spots. People are unaware of so many things, and as a mediator, negotiator, I act as a mirror and make them reflect on what they've said, but doing so with kindness and nurturing. You do need to change your voice. You do need to camouflage, and I feel I do that well. You have to talk people's language.
Yes.
You have to talk their words. If they, it's no point talking to someone in a way that they're not going to be able to relate to you. So I think that's really important. I also read Katie Byron. I don't know if anyone's come across that resource. She's amazing with her 4 questions.
Oh, Katie Byron. And what's the book called?
Well, I would say look up Katie Byron, and it's called, I'm sure it's the 4 questions. I don't know if I've got anything written down now.
Okay.
But what she does with her questions is there's a concept called the turnaround. And when we say, oh, she's like this, is that person really like that, or am I really like that? And are we projecting?
Oh yeah.
So and I think also when people say he always does this, she never does that. It's kind of breaking that down as well. Is that really true? So Katie Byron starts off with, is that really true? Is that always the case?
Yes. Fantastic. That sounds like a great book. And one of my favorite books on this topic, while we're on it, is Crucial Conversations. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's when the stakes are high and when emotions run high and when there's difference of opinion. That's a crucial that's how you define a crucial conversation. And of course, when I heard about that, I thought, there are so many times in my life that I've been in that situation, of course, most oftenly with my ex. But it rang a bell straight away. And those are the most difficult ones for us those most difficult conversations for us to manage and actually come out with ourselves. And I guess that's when we need help from third parties, isn't it?
Yes, I must look up that book. I haven't read that. So, just when you think you've read nearly all of them, you can never read enough. But it's interesting how you said you learned that in your relationship, because, even Tony Robbins says you're going to grow the most in a relationship, because in a relationship, all your fears are going to come out. Am I enough? Am I going to be loved? And all the little nitty bits about your personality, they're all going to come out in a relationship. So you learn about yourself more than you would normally in that context.
Yeah, I think it does depend on the type of relationship that you have. And I don't think the relationship that I have was particularly conducive, shall we say, to personal growth and development. I won't say any more. But I think what is interesting is that, again, because we are talking about personal development and some foundational psychological principles, I think one of the things that really made me realize why my last marriage didn't work is because, and then I got this from John DeMartini, who I'm going to be interviewing fairly soon for my
he's
episode.
fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, so the values factor. So I did some training with him a few years ago, and what he explained is, look, you just have to look around and say, what are my values? What is most important to me at the moment? And you don't even have to think very hard about it, because, okay, what do I spend my time on? What do I spend my money on? Where do I spend most of my time physically, and what is around me in that space? And those are your values. So, my values are very much around my business at the moment. That's where I spend a lot of my time. I spend a lot of money on my business, and I'm in my workspace a lot of the time. So I realized that my ex's values his value system was very different to mine, and that we were always we were kind of clashing like that, because I wanted something that he didn't want. And sometimes people don't even see that, and they don't even realize it. They just think, why can't I get through to this person? And of course, the reason why is just because, they're looking at the world through a different lens. And they're never going to look at it through your lens. And it doesn't matter how hard you try, it's just never, ever going to work. And I realized that retrospectively, and I'm not a stupid person, but I tell you what, it took me a long time of bashing my head against a brick wall to actually realize that. And when I finally learned about the values, I thought, my God, this is like the scales have just fallen from my eyes. So sometimes it really does take somebody from the outside, doesn't it, to shine the
Yes.
light on what's actually going on and bring their wisdom, because we can't always see ourselves, can we?
No, you are right, and it does take a third person to shine that light. You know, I know counsellors do that, but I think, you know, this is where a third party can really benefit. People are like, oh, I don't need a mediator. I'll just sit down with my husband and we'll have a conversation. And I'm not saying in every situation you should have a mediator, but if you are struggling and you're having the same conversations and you're not seeing the same, you know, you said about lenses, we all put on different lenses and we can look at the same thing and see it differently. But if you are struggling and you think, keep having the same conversation again and again, you know, and I'm phrasing it differently, or we keep having the same clash, I would say that's when you do need a third party. You do need someone objective, you know, and have a conversation with someone, because there may be something that you're just not seeing, or some baggage you're carrying from the past and that you're bringing into that relationship. But I can relate to what you said about trying everything and thinking, I'm not a stupid person, why is my relationship not working? I can relate to that. I mean, I've been through a divorce before, and so, you know, and I tried everything to make my marriage work. So it's, you know, people are so hard on themselves when it may well just be the values are different, or you wanted to clearly grow as an individual and you're into that personal development and maybe they weren't.
No. Well, no, they were probably into their own growth, but they weren't into me growing. Yeah.
It's interesting actually, because it's relationships, but also I've noticed there's been a lot of conflict around after someone's passed away, and that's very, very relevant topic at the moment with coronavirus. You know, there's been so many deaths, and that's led to business disputes and led to you know, disputes between family members.
Yep. Yes, and you read about it in the papers, don't you, as well? And I know particularly this thing about who did the business belong to, who does it really belong to, and what's going to happen to all the assets associated with it? What's all of those things? I know they're really big issues. And I've seen it as well. And in fact, I was just thinking, Sandy, as you were speaking, I was thinking back to when I worked in media, and I was thinking I worked for two businesses where there were, let's just say, partners that didn't really get on that well together. And one of them, they actually had a mediation specialist come in and see them on a weekly basis. And they managed to sort everything out, and they managed to keep the business together. I don't really know what happened behind closed doors because I wasn't on the board of that particular company. But what I do know is that they came together and they made this business a success, and then they sold it, because that's the name of the game. That's what everybody wants to do in media, is sell their businesses and get
business and sell it. Yeah,
exactly. So then the business that I came into, so what actually happened when I joined this business is the two partners that were running it, they were like parents, that they were like, we were all like the children. It didn't matter what level of seniority we were in the company. These two guys owned it, and they really didn't get on well with each other, and they would try and get everybody to take sides. And so you had to be either in his camp or either in his camp. And people that were in his camp, they weren't really allowed to be friendly with the people that were in his camp. And it was honestly
very childish.
Oh, I know. It was very, very hard to actually straddle both camps. And it was just an awful, awful situation. And what happened is the bookkeeper was the go-to person. She was like the company counselor for these two guys. So they used to go into her room she was the only one who could actually get their attention. But of course, she wasn't doing her bookkeeping work. So basically what happened is one of them ran off to the US, leaving the other one with, you know, the baby. And that was an opportunity for me, because that was when he transferred some shares to me and said, I just can't do it. You know, you be MD, you work with me. You know, let's just, you know, build it up and sell it, because he doesn't want any of it anymore. And he thinks, you know, that I'm a loser or whatever. So so that was really an opportunity for me. And we did build it and we did sell it. And that was, you know, my exit from that world. So that all kind of worked out well. But I was just remembering that kind of awful situation and how that unresolved conflict, it spills out, doesn't it, onto many, many people all around you. And hi, Richard.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah.
Absolutely. It really does. I mean, I see it all the time in workplaces as well.
Yeah.
And you know, then it's really awkward for the rest of the team. You know, they, especially if they get along with both.
Yeah.
You know, then they're like, oh, I can't really talk to her, and birthday lunch, and shall I invite her? Shall I not? And you know, it is unresolved conflict that, you know, being really serious now is costing businesses thousands of pounds every year.
Millions,
and, you know,
billions.
I was going to say, for that's just locally, it is billion. So the last stat I know was 33 billion pounds a year for businesses going through conflict. But I'm, you know, talking about a small business, you know, with, I don't know, 15 employees, 20 employees, it costs them thousands, but that's just money. And then there's the time, the hours, the stress. Like you were saying, you know, they kept going to that lady, you know, did you say
the bookkeeper,
and she's not then able to, I need to call her payroll, then she's not able to do her work. So I had the same phone call just a couple of weeks ago, one Friday. The company, she does everything to do with the company, HR, she many functions, but she can't do any of that. She can't secure any new contracts because she's too busy solving conflict between these two people. The lady's going to her crying, the man's moaning. You know, and that's when she got me in, and she was so pleased when I said the workplace mediation was successful. She said, I'm actually going to have my life back. You know, she's going to be able to get on with her job. She's going to be able to get home and not moan about these two people to her husband. And actually be fully present with her children. So when someone's in conflict, it's so draining. It's draining for them. It's draining for all the people around them. And the hours, the time, the stress, not to mention mental health. You know, it's
a big one.
Yeah. I mean, it's a no-brainer to get a mediator involved.
Productivity plunges. And that was the thing that I saw in this business, because the other thing is, it's leadership, isn't it? So neither of them, they were not demonstrating leadership. And when you have a leaderless company, then it becomes a free-for-all, and there's all these power grabs. And so the whole business feels very unstable. So I personally think the issue of conflict resolution should be right up there as number one on the agenda. Look, and in fact, I know from going through the acquisition process and obviously knowing people in private equity and venture capital and all of those areas, that if there is conflict between board members, the company becomes uninvestable. And it really does, because nobody wants to go near it. It's they know that it is a bad thing. So
I mean, no one wants to get involved in an organization like that, because eventually someone's going to want to bring a claim, you know, against someone. And I think this is the thing. There needs to be early intervention. And you know, but I think people are afraid of labeling. Oh, the conflict's got so bad, we need a mediator. It shouldn't be that way. It should just be part of the organization's culture that actually, you know, we do try and resolve matters between ourselves. But if it's okay to ask for help, it's okay to get a mediator in. It's not a bad cross against your name. In fact, it's a more adult way of dealing with things.
Yeah.
and actually it's going to save thousands of pounds. And when you said about leadership, how can you lead when you're not, you need to lead by example.
Yeah.
And the recent workplace mediation I did, both were heads of their own department. And I did say to them in the mediation that the way they deal with this conflict, because everyone's aware that they don't get on, these two heads of department, the way they deal with this conflict shows their skills as a leader to their team. And if they go back and say, I mean, what do they say? They say, we went to a mediator. And what will they say then? What's the message they're going to give to their team? They signed a confidentiality agreement, but people talk. And will they say, actually, we went to the mediation, it was successful, and we've sorted out our differences, which is what they agreed to say, which then shows the team that actually things can get resolved.
Well, yes, as I said, the business that it was actually an events business that I worked in. In fact, I interviewed the owner of the business for my podcast earlier on, because when he sold the business, he actually went off and bought a vineyard in New Zealand. So
nice.
that was what he did. But anyway, so I do remember that really the way that they dealt with that was very mature. It really was. And I think everybody kind of respected the fact that they were very different people, but they addressed that in a sensible way, so that they were together. Everybody knew that they were together, that they were doing this thing together. And so as a result, everybody was at peace, whatever their feelings about these two people. And I happen to really like one of them and I really dislike the other one. But anyway, that was a personal thing. But nevertheless, they were together. It was like a functional marriage,
right?
That was actually going places. So I do think
they had that common cause then.
Yeah, common cause.
They had a common cause, they had a common outcome, and they were clearly driven in order to achieve that, even at the risk of knowing that they don't gel, their personalities don't gel. People are so afraid of being different. I don't get along with her because they're different. You can still achieve what you want to achieve even if you don't get on. You can't, to expect everyone to behave the way you do, I think it's the biggest myth. People want people to react to situations like they do. So I may say to you, Jane, he did this and he did that. He shouldn't have done that, should he, Jane? I want you to agree with me, but actually that's not the be all and end all. It's okay. You don't have to get people to agree, as long as you know why you're in a relationship with them, whether it's a working relationship, business, whatever the cause.
Yeah, and it was interesting what you said about in a way that there's almost some stigma about people bringing in somebody like mediation lawyer. It's like things must have got really, really bad, or it's the same kind of closed mindset that if you go and see a psychologist or a therapist, or you hire a coach, so there's something deficient with you. And it's such an old-fashioned kind of attitude, because if the help's available, and if you can afford it, and if the help's available, any help, any expert help from outside, as long as it's the right help, is only going to make you stronger. We are stronger together. That's what I believe. So
100% agree with that. I mean, it's really interesting. I think the perception is changing, but there is still a lot of stigma there. I mean, one thing that these two employees said, who are heads of their department, is, the organization, the employer must think quite a lot of us, must think, much of us to organize this mediation. I said, that's right. You're obviously valuable members, valuable employees. Otherwise, the employer wouldn't have bothered. But the employer had enough.
Yes.
And, I think it was a last resort, and I was recommended. But it shouldn't have to get to that stage, but people just feel that it's got to be a last resort mediation. I mean, I definitely think legal process should be a last resort, for sure.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. And I'm also thinking, Sandy, because I also have a small business in property, and some of the bitterest and the most ugly fallouts have been in that world. Because I think I don't know if you've seen any of this, but I think what tends to happen, and this is what I've seen, is that people have this idea that investing in other people's development projects, for example, is a safe thing to do, or let's just say a low risk thing to do. I've actually done it myself, and I've got to say it was an absolute roller coaster. I did come out on top, but I lost money on one project, and I didn't make very much on another one, and then I made a lot on another one, and then I thought, well, I'm just crazy doing this stuff. This is like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's just completely mad. So I see a lot of people go into it with just this kind of rosy idea that it's going to be okay. And obviously, as a lawyer, you will know that in those types of projects, not only is there risk from outside, so there's this constantly kind of moving feast with property, because you never know what legislation is going to come in, what's going to happen with the economy. Of course, there's things like Brexit. Who knew what the outcome of Brexit would be and what the impact would be? And so there's all of these planning laws. Planning laws can change. People can they can move from one planning department to another, and something that was looked as though it was going to be absolutely a dead cert to get passed can then get refused, and all of these things, they can just go on and on and on. So it's very, very high risk. And what I've seen many times over is people come into that situation just thinking about the rewards. And of course, when it goes wrong, when things take longer, when unforeseen things happen, and it turns out that they're going to either not make much money, or they are actually going to lose money, and I know people that have lost a lot of money, then of course it gets very, very, very bitter. And so those are probably the highest stakes situations that I've seen. Do you work with any people in the property industry, and do you see this at all?
Yes, every week. So
okay.
I'm thinking about my caseload at the moment. There's a lot of the litigation files I've got are property related. So a lot of my clients are developers, and what you were saying, people trying to broker a deal, and then it didn't quite go according to plan. And did they have anything signed? No, but his word was as good as, and all the usual things. And you're like, really? You fell for this? But there's the law, and then there's the real world. And of course, hindsight is 2020. People have been doing these kind of deals for so long. So when it comes to maybe the third or fourth deal, and then it all falls apart, they're like, well, the first two deals were fine, but it's a risk every time. And I think there is an element of get rich scheme.
Get rich quick. Yes.
Get rich quick. Sorry. Yes. Thanks for and people don't think about the risk, whereas if they've got some legal advice beforehand, the amount of times I hear people saying, or they'll wait until they're about to be made bankrupt. That's a very common one I've got at the moment.
Really?
Got bankruptcy hearing. I've been burying my head in the sand. Can you now help? It's like, can you come to me sooner?
Oh, gosh.
So, or order for sale is another popular one.
Yep.
The money zone, people signing legal charges under duress, but trying to prove that. And then, it's a minefield. But I love helping people. I love helping clients. And there are a lot of people who admit, yes, I was scared, so I signed this document, or I made a mistake, and I guess you learn from your mistakes, but it can be extremely costly.
And it can be very painful as well. And I have to say that I learned from my mistakes, and knowing what I know now, I do actually support investors, but I do it in a very, very limited way. And I will only work with investors who really, they absolutely know the risks, and they know that, you know, if they lose money, if they lose everything, it's not going to wipe them out. It's just going to be a bit painful, because they know what they're getting themselves into. And
Yeah.
those are the investors that are okay. You know, they're okay, and
they're not going to put their house up for collateral or anything like that.
no,
See,
no, they're not going to
yeah.
be put on the streets. Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
Exactly.
especially when they've got a family, a young family. You know, I have this chap at the moment, he's got a young family, and he's got worried about this order for sale, and it's a mess. It's a total mess.
Yeah. Oh, poor guy. You know, I really feel for him, because you know, that's why on the group, I often say this to people, but I say, look, I'll speak to anybody. I'll give anybody, any entrepreneur who's going through struggles, I will give them a bit of time. I won't charge them for it, because it's the very least that I can do is just give them like a little bit of help and support, because I know that people have the best intentions in the world, but they do make mistakes. And yeah, so it's
you've got to be
tough.
compassionate, you know, you've got to be kind, you've got to realize they're only human, they're only trying to do their best, they're only trying to provide.
Well, we're all only human, trying to do our best and trying to provide for our families, really, aren't we? It's just
we are.
Some of us make worse mistakes than others.
Yeah, and actually, even as adults, talking about when we were talking about conflict, you know, we all become childlike, and we are not just human, but we're emotional beings. And
yes,
nearly all the conflict that I have seen, experienced myself, and help people resolve,
yes,
is due to emotions.
mm-hmm.
You know, there's always an emotional driver.
Yes.
You know, either they're, you know, going towards pain, you know, trying to pull away from pain, or they want something, but it's always linked to a couple of emotions, is what I found.
Yes. Do you find that conflict resolution can actually address those emotions? Do you find that you can lower the emotional temperature? Or do you find that you just kind of divert people's attention away, and you just make them see things in a slightly more rational way?
That's a really good question. So when people are in conflict, and I'm trying to work with them to try and resolve it, you know, it's important to find out what the emotions are and label those. You know, if someone is feeling, you know, someone's angry, and, you know, and then it'll come down to hurt. It's like, so you're angry because you're actually hurt. So that'll be one thing. And then once we know what the emotion is, then we can talk about it logically.
Yeah.
Okay. But they're going to want to discuss their emotions first in order to then look at it logically. And I think some people do make the mistake of going in, you know, I mean it innocently. I mean, there's managers out there who say, like, I don't need a mediator, I'm going to go and mediate between these two, you know, employees. And the manager approaches it in a very logical way. And they say, you know, and they give credit to those two employees. They say, come on, you know, we're all adults here, and we're going to resolve this, and But it's too logical. It's too much of a logical approach when the conflict is generated out of emotions. What I do find is at the end, people are become more logical than emotional, but they need to become emotional first.
Yeah,
in order to rationalize and understand. You know, because a lot of people say, do you know, I'm really annoyed with him, and I don't know why I'm annoyed with him.
Do they?
You know, and I shouldn't be. And when I go into a room with him, and I'm gonna, you know, be very calm, and I'm not gonna. And I'm thinking, this is not gonna work. You know, if you're emotional, they need to see some of that emotion. You can't just bandage it.
The thought of going into a room and being very angry with somebody and just trying to remain calm, it sounds like really hard work.
That's right. And I say that's not really going to work, because as the dialogue progresses, the anger will come out.
Yeah.
But the amount of times that people, they're upset, even in tears, I won't cry in front of her, or I won't let her see me upset or him upset. So we need to tackle that first. So I think sometimes when people are in conflict, it's always like, oh, it's the other person and we need to mediate. Sometimes when you're in conflict, you actually need to do some internal work yourself.
Yes.
And that's what I find. So if ever I'm in a conflict with someone, I'm thinking, okay, let me check my understanding of the situation. What are my emotions? Why am I feeling so annoyed? Let's work on ourselves first, rather than just blaming other people or telling other people how they ought to be. If we control our state, Tony Robbins talks a lot about state, and it's true. When we stand up, we're different when we sit down. Our state is different. Mm-hmm. So, if we're feeling sluggish and we go and do some exercise, how can we feel better as a result? And we actually think we might feel more tired after exercise. So if we can control our state, our breathing and our tone, our pace, and maybe do some work, write a few things down about how you're feeling before you then go and address a conflict yourself, or even get involved in a mediation. I'm not saying mediator can be everywhere. You're going to have some difficult conversations yourself. And I do run some courses about having difficult conversations. But at the all those courses, and start with, can you control yourself first of all, your own state? Do you understand yourself?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I mean, I'm quite good at that, because I don't really know why. I'm quite a calm person, so I do sometimes lose my temper, but it's really, when I lose it, I do lose it, but I don't very often. So, and I've got to have a really good cause, but if I do lose it, I'm afraid it's like that. But I do think that some people, they just do react in a knee-jerk way, don't they? And I know that my ex was like that, and I used to think poor impulse control, that's the word, poor impulse control, because some people, they're not able to press the pause button, and something happens in their heads and they're just reacting the whole time,
rather than responding. I mean, I talk about that, it's just a 3-second pause.
Yeah, but that is a very, very difficult thing for some people to learn. And I know that with my ex, he probably hate it that I've been talking about him. But anyway, he won't watch this anyway. So
it's not just your ex. People talk about their work colleagues as though that is their ex-partner. It's whoever it is, and they don't pause, or they can't.
Yeah.
But what did he used to do?
Yeah, so it's to do with as I said, reacting, and literally, and my mother was also like this, which is maybe why I ended up with my ex, because it was familiar to me, but it was just this thing of like, something would trigger them, and then they would just go off the deep end.
Right.
And I think that it's not a quick fix for people who have that tendency. A lot of the time there is some emotional imbalance there. And so I think for me, I've never really had that. I've always been quite an even-tempered person. But the thing that I have learned is that there are just some people who, should we say, are more emotionally stable than others. And there are some people who will always have some difficulty interpersonally because they have some emotional instability. And funnily enough, those people also tend to be less receptive, I think, to external interventions and external influences. And whereas the people who are more open and a bit more receptive, they're more malleable, if you like, because they are more kind of responsive and so on. And that's just my observation. But I was just
No, I
wondering.
think it's a
Yeah.
very good observation.
Hmm.
And actually, those people, there are people, you know, we've got to be honest, there are people out there who are opinionated, who are not willing to learn a different approach. And you're right, there will be people who just fly off the handle. I mean, and take it really mildly, you know, that you'll notice in your circle of friends, you know, whoever's listening to this, there's some people always complaining about something.
Yeah.
You know, the injustice of this. And
Yes.
you and I, we could complain about something every single day if we wanted to, but we
Yes.
choose not to. And
Yes.
that's where we're choosing our reaction,
Yes.
or choosing our response rather.
Yes.
And you know, it's not easy, is it? If we touch on the heart, we're going to react. You're going to pull away our hand. But
Yeah.
actually, you can choose your response.
You can.
You just need to pause, even if it's 3 seconds. You can still shout after 3 seconds, but it will be better for yourself as well as the other person. But it's interesting. There are you know, there are a lot of people out there who are not open to learning a different way. And where does that stem from? Does, you know, maybe it's their childhood, maybe it's an, as you said, an emotional imbalance, maybe they're more emotionally sensitive, or maybe they're not emotionally aware.
Yeah, I think it's emotionally aware is the thing. I think that some people, they just I just don't think that they care. Actually, I don't think they care enough about other people and about the impact that they have on other people. And I think you have to be somebody who cares. I think in order to modify your behavior and in order to make the experience of you better for other people, fundamentally. And I remember somebody, I can't remember where I read this, but I did read it in a book. It was like, look, you know, most people are 100% selfish. A lot of people are like 98% selfish or something like that. And you know, people that are 49% selfish, or 51% selfish or something, they're in the real minority. So, you know, we're all selfishly driven, but there are some people who are more caring and they are more conscious of their impact on others. And I think some people will only be, their behavior will only be modified if they are basically confronted with a very stark choice. And look, if you don't fall in line, you're going to lose your job. Then you're going to have no money and nobody else is going to hire you because you're going to have a terrible reference because you'll be sacked because you behaved in an awful way and you did these terrible things.
Yes.
So then it's like, oh, okay, right. I better had. And that's, of course, the reason why prisons exist and
Yes.
you know, the criminal justice system and all of that. And you know, that there's a
But
sort
it's only when they hit rock bottom or when they have a crisis of some kind that they have to change. But you're right, until then they won't. People,
no,
there are people out there who don't care, and we have to accept that.
Yes,
you know?
exactly. So those kind of people, I would imagine, the process of conflict resolution has to be kind of coupled with a very clear awareness, really, of the consequences of inaction or the consequences of staying the same. Whereas other people who are perhaps more motivated by the desire to be liked and to get on well with people and to have a harmonious atmosphere around them and to have that happy experience of relationships, they're probably going to be more receptive and more motivated by that and maybe more willing to kind of you know, just see other people's point of view. And but it's
you're right, sometimes you do need more leverage with those people, for sure. And I you know, as a solicitor and a mediator, I do need to find that leverage. You know, it's not always there, it's not always apparent, but there will be something. So when all else fails, you know, when someone's worried they will lose their job, it's surprising how they do fall in line. Or they have to modify. I think it's not even just falling in line, they have to modify something they've never had to do in their life because they've always had it a certain way, or people have always listened to them, and suddenly now the team's not listening to them. They'll blame the whole team except for themselves, the common factor, the common denominator. So But that's how we change, through crisis, through conflict. We grow. Conflict's actually a good thing.
Yes.
Through conflict, something will change, something good will happen, even if it appears, terrible at the time. There'll be a learning of some kind, and there'll be some growth of some kind. Your personality will change, your perception. You can help other people. You'll make better decisions. Like they say about how do you make good decisions? By making bad ones, first of all.
That's right.
Good judgment is from bad experiences, which came from bad decisions.
That's right. Well, listen, Sandy, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you tonight. I've had such a brilliant conversation with you, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners will really have enjoyed it and appreciated it as well. So if you're listening live on the Smart Connector group or any of our other platforms, I just wanted to say thank you for being with us tonight, guys, and thank you very, very much. Now, Sandy, if people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Thank you. Just before I give that, thank you so much for being so open and honest about your experiences as well, which has added to this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm Sandy Brown. I've got a company called Legal Mediation. So you can contact me as the website www.legalmediation.co.uk, and I will then triage your matter, whether it's mediation or if you need a solicitor. Then I work at a solicitor's firm as well.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Sandy, and I'll see you again soon.
Yes, thank you for the conversation, Jane, and thank you to everyone who listened.